Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and we are concerningly far into August, considering that I have yet to talk about my July reads. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's video. We're going to be filling out my reading journal spreads for July and talking about the books that I read that month. So since we're already so far behind on that, let's not waste any more time talking and let's jump straight into my book reviews. Alright, so the first book I read in July was Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in the Expanse series. And I am using a new rating system now, so if you haven't seen the video where I explain that, go ahead and check it out. I do talk about this book in that video, but I'm going to go ahead and just go through the score that I gave it anyway, for the sake of this video. So for plot, I gave it the full point. For prose, I'm giving it 0.75. For people, also 0.75. Peripherals, the same. And then for pleasure, I gave it the full point for a final score of 4.25, which is pretty good. I really enjoyed this book overall. It was a very fun read, and initially I actually watched the first season of this TV show first, and I enjoyed that, and I had heard people talk about the books, and honestly, not gonna lie, part of the reason that I had been interested in reading it is the, I don't know if it's the anniversary edition or just a general special edition, but it's got bright pink sprayed edges and a pink design on the cover, and I really like it. But I was like, oh, I can't buy a special edition of a book I don't even know if I like. So then I saw a copy at the thrift store, and I was like, you know what, it's a perfect time to give it a shot, and if I really like it, maybe I will eventually get myself those fancy special editions. So that is how I came to be reading Leviathan Wakes. I also read it for a week of reading sci-fi vlogs, so this is another video you could check out when you're done this if you're interested. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. On one hand, I kind of want to say it's definitely one of those books that is not requiring a ton of brain power. In a lot of ways, it's quite straightforward. With the plot, I think the characters they're not simple. They definitely have stuff going on, but I wouldn't say they're extremely complicated either. I think it's pretty good balance, but a little bit maybe more on the lighter, less in-depth side than something like Robin Hobb or even Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. I do think that the plot is pretty straightforward. It's a lot of action, and we're just kind of going really from one action scene to the next. There are some of those sort of downtime moments where you get a chance to connect with the characters, and ordinarily I would say that maybe I wanted more of those, but I think that it worked for the story and for the overall craft of the book. I don't want to say that it's simple again, but I just think the level that everything went to was pretty similar, and so it worked really well as a whole, if that makes sense. It does make some commentary on class and racism when they're talking about Earth versus the Mars people versus the Belters, who the Belters are essentially the poor, marginalized group. And I do think it's well done, but I don't think it's the most in-depth or cutting-edge commentary ever, but it is a pretty essential part of the world building and the storytelling, and it makes sense sort of within the world, and I do appreciate what he is saying with that. As I said, it's very fast-paced. We got lots of action. We got spaceship battles. There's some more smaller scale action. There's explosions. We got all of it. I do like the pacing. As I said, it's very fun, very readable, I would say. It's easy to read large sections of this book in one go, because it just kind of draws you in with all the action and boom, boom, boom. You're like, oh, I gotta see how this ends. And then all of a sudden you're doing this thing and you gotta see how that ends. And yeah, it was just very, very readable. That is really, I think, kind of what I would say about this book, as a general summary. It's compulsively readable. I don't know if compulsively is the right word there, but that is the vibe that I got from it. Yeah, the only thing really was could maybe get a little bit more from the people, like because it's so quick paced, you don't get quite as many like moments in their heads, learning what they're thinking. You don't get quite as many like quiet moments with them, like interacting with each other and stuff. I would maybe like some more female characters. And then the prose is also, it's definitely good. I think it really fits the story, but it's kind of more of the stripped back simple style, and sometimes I like a little bit more descriptiveness and that kind of thing. And yeah, overall 4.25 stars, very enjoyable, and I really was looking forward to picking up the next book when I finished this, and I think that's the mark of a good read. Alright, next I read The Dragon's Legacy by Deborah A. Wolfe. And the fact that this is a debut novel, honestly, amazing. Blown away. I wish I could write a debut novel like this, but I already know that my writing is not anywhere near as good as hers. I was saying about Leviathan Wakes that I was missing a little bit in the prose, and this 100% made up for that. So, in terms of my rating, I gave it full points on all categories, so that's plot, prose, people, peripherals, and pleasure, for a full 5-star rating. I really enjoyed the prose in this book. It was on like the more descriptive and like, I don't want to call it flowery, but that's kind of like the only word that comes to mind. But it wasn't like slow and drawn out and like wasting a ton of time on descriptions. It was like describing things as they were relevant, and just the way that all the sentences were constructed was, I felt, very well done, well thought through, very balanced. It wasn't specifically the fastest moving book. I don't think it was the slowest one I read either, though. So, I also a good balance there, as with the prose, gotta find a good middle ground that hits the spot. That being said, I do like a lot of slower moving books, or the books that people think are slow moving. So if you prefer something that is not quite so slow moving, then maybe this wouldn't be the one for you. But I think that the speed of the pacing is well done, considering how much detail we get about the world building and the characters and their relationships and developing all that kind of thing. I like it when books spend more time on that, because if I'm not connected to the characters, then overall I'm just not gonna be as invested in the book or care about it as much or think about it after I've finished reading it. So I appreciate that kind of thing and spending time on that kind of thing. And I think one of my favorite elements was the world building. It was just very unique compared to a lot of the high fantasy that I've been reading, or like that I've seen around. I loved the desert setting that most of it takes place in, and the descriptions of living in the desert and how the culture fits in with that setting, and they seem to like respect each other and be like in symbiosis with each other, almost like the way the culture works makes sense for their environment. And I just really enjoyed that kind of vibe and the descriptions. And then there is a city as well, but we spend most of the time in the desert, and that's probably my sort of favorite setting and culture. We do get sort of a more expanded worldview as it goes on, where there are different countries and cultures and all that kind of thing that it looks like we're kind of gonna get more into probably in the second book as the scope expands. In terms of characters, I really liked them. We got a bunch of different perspectives, so we were able to get into a bunch of different characters' heads and sort of see their thought processes and their characterizations, I guess, which I really enjoyed. We did, of course, have a couple characters who were more main, got their point of view told more often, and I like the female main character, like the younger one. I think she's really interesting, but the only thing I didn't really super care for was they introduced kind of like a romance with that young female lead, and I don't know, sometimes I just feel like I don't need there to be like a romance in every single book. Like, I get why authors do it, because it's like such an essential part of like human life, and then that tends to happen to people, they fall in love with other people. But sometimes I'm just like, is this necessary? I don't know. But yeah, it didn't really take away from my enjoyment. As you can see, I still gave it 5 stars, I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend that you check it out. And yeah, on to the next book. All right, after that, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I don't know if I said that right. I apologize if I did not. So for this one, I gave it half of a point for plot, 0.75 for prose, 0.75 for people, half a point for peripherals, and half a point for pleasure. Now, this is one of those books that was really popular on BookTube like several years back in like the sort of more like contemporary, I don't know what you call it, type section of BookTube. That's where I initially started watching BookTube, but I kind of got out of it when I found the fantasy niche, and I don't really read that much just like general or contemporary fiction anymore. It's just not really my jam as much. But that gives this book overall 3 stars, which is definitely less than I think people were giving it then. It was very sort of hyped, and it was interesting. It's like a magical realism based in a cafe where you can time travel by sitting in a specific chair, and you only have until the coffee gets cold, and then you are transported back into the present. So I thought that was an interesting concept. However, I think the stories that he told with that were maybe a little bit lackluster. So we get a few different vignettes of different people visiting the cafe and doing their little time travel thing, which I think is like a good way to like structure it. I just wish that their like time travel and their like overall stories were a little bit more impactful. Like I feel like he was trying to make them impactful and kind of meaningful, but I don't know, like they were trying to say something, but I ultimately felt maybe a little bit shallow. And honestly, some of them, like the moral of some of them, I didn't really like. So there's like a woman who she left the family business because she wanted to have her own life, have her own freedom. She didn't want to be involved in that. And then her sister dies. She does her little time travel thing. And then she interprets the whole thing as like she has to give up on her dream and go back to her family's hotel and do that. And it's just like, I don't know. I get like reconciliation with your family can be like a good thing, but I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. Because it's so short, you don't really connect as much to the people as you could. And so maybe these things would mean more if I was more invested in the characters, but it just wasn't really that much. Like I like the idea of like the cafe based time travel and the idea of like and the vibe of the cafe. And there were like some good quotes in there, but overall it was good, but I wouldn't say that it was anything like nearly as good as I feel like it was pitched to be. So yeah, that's Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And then finally I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This was a reread, and I don't remember if I gave it 5 stars the first time. I am this time. Just because, I don't know, I had such a good time. I have no notes. This was definitely a reread I was very excited to get to. It's been a while since I read the first trilogy. I think I read it probably 2 years ago now. And honestly, just as good the second time around. Potentially even better because I get to play Spot the Foreshadowing. There's a couple books I've reread this year. Well, I reread that one, and I'm partway through book 3 of Wheel of Time rereading it. And honestly, it's just so fun, actually. Like, I don't know why we've all sort of gotten out of rereading. Like, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to just read all the new books now. But honestly, rereading a book is so fun because you get to spot all the little bits that hint at the conclusion. And I just really enjoyed that. And being able to get something deeper out of it the second time around, I just think that's so valuable. And I loved watching Fitz grow up again in the fraught world of Buckkeep with its various characters, shall we say, and politics. It definitely forgot some of the traumatic shit that Fitz went through, and it does help make Fitz's character and behavior make more sense throughout the rest of the series. Like, yes, sometimes he can be very dramatic and in his head and honestly kind of annoying sometimes, but like considering his life and what he's been through, is it that surprising that he's very in his head? Probably not. And Hop's character work, honestly, I say this every time I talk about her, but like it's just unparalleled. Even like side characters feel dynamic and interesting, and I always feel like her villains, like specifically the more like the red ship traders are technically not traders, but like the red ship people are technically the villains in this story, but really the villain is Regal, and she just manages to make them so like human, and that makes them so much more believable and hateable when the things that they're doing are like actually things that like could happen in the real world. Like maybe not the elements with the fantasy, but like people acting that way and the reasons they act that way. People do act like that, and that's what makes them so despicable, because you could see that shit happening in real life. That's pretty much all I have to say about Assassin's Apprentice. So yeah, that's everything that I read in July. Alright, I hope you guys have enjoyed hearing about my July reads. I apologize that it was so late. I will do my best not to be quite so late with August, but of course, sometimes things happen, we shall see. But thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.